In a quiet neighborhood of Bogotá, on the morning of October 15, 2024, the phone call Óscar Naranjo received while sipping his coffee would forever change not only his own life but also the history of Colombia's justice system. The caller was young Commissioner Carlos Rodriguez, whose voice carried the desperation of a 20-year unsolved case knocking on the retired general's door as their last hope. "General, we need your help," Rodriguez began the conversation. "The María Elena Castillo murder. It's been an open case since 2004. We've tried everything, exhausted all avenues. You're our last resort." These words marked a turning point for Naranjo, who had been living a peaceful retirement. Because the María Elena Castillo case wasn't just an unsolved murder, but one of the Colombian police's greatest failures. The brilliant 28-year-old lawyer had been found dead in her home on the night of November 12, 2004. Crime scene evidence clearly showed this was a premeditated murder. However, for 20 years, despite dozens of experienced detectives, hundreds of hours of interrogation, thousands of pages of reports, and all the capabilities of modern technology, no one had been able to solve this case. What would happen in the next 72 hours would become one of the most extraordinary success stories in modern criminology history. Naranjo's only advantage was the experience gained over the years and his ability to look from different angles. But how could a case unsolved for 20 years be solved by a retired general in 3 days? What secret lay behind this success? And most importantly, what was that critical clue that everyone had missed for so long? When Naranjo brought the thick file home that afternoon, he faced concrete evidence of 20 years of meticulous work. Crime scene photos, witness statements, forensic reports, DNA analyses, and countless hypotheses. Each was carefully filed, indexed, and analyzed. This file was concrete proof of years of effort and labor. However, as soon as Naranjo opened the file, he felt something was missing. There were too many details in the 20-year investigation, but no clear answers to basic questions. He spent the first night just reading. He carefully examined each page, took notes, and tried to form a picture in his mind. He worked until 4 in the morning and went to bed exhausted. However, his mind was still occupied with the case. The next morning, he wanted to go to the crime scene. He needed to see María Elena's house and examine the crime scene with his own eyes. The house was in a middle-class neighborhood of Bogotá, and despite 20 years passing, its external appearance hadn't changed much. The landlady was an elderly woman who said she loved María Elena very much. She was a very good tenant, never caused any problems. That night she was also at home. Everything was normal. "I was shocked when I found her body in the morning," she said tearfully. While examining the inside of the house, Naranjo noticed an anomaly. The location of blood traces mentioned in crime scene investigation reports didn't exactly match those in the photographs. This small inconsistency was the first clue. Perhaps an important detail had been overlooked. That evening, Naranjo re-examined witness statements. María Elena's neighbors, friends, and colleagues had been questioned dozens of times. They all said the same thing: María Elena was calm, loved, and had no enemies. However, Naranjo discovered inconsistencies in these statements. On the morning of the second day, Naranjo visited the law office where María Elena worked. The office was still in the same place, but the employees had changed. When he talked to former employees, he learned that María Elena had been acting strangely before her murder. "She was very tense and worried in the last weeks," said Mercedes, the former secretary. "She was constantly receiving phone calls but wouldn't say who she was talking to. I saw her crying once, but she didn't explain why. This information wasn't in the file." Naranjo noted this new information and realized he needed to investigate deeper. María Elena's last days before her murder could be key. Phone records, appointments, meetings, everything was important. In the afternoon, Naranjo visited María Elena's family. Her mother and father were still living their pain despite 20 years having passed. "We won't find peace until our daughter's killer is found," said her father. Every police chief promised the same thing, but the result was always the same. The family confirmed that María Elena had been acting strangely in the days before her murder. "She would call us frequently, asking about our health. It was as if she was saying goodbye," said her mother. This behavior showed that María Elena felt danger. That night, Naranjo tried to bring all the information together. María Elena's strange behavior in her last days, phone conversations, and worried state suggested that she was under threat. But where was this threat coming from? On the morning of the third day, Naranjo looked at the file once more. This time he approached from a different angle. How María Elena was killed. She had been shot, but the weapon had never been found. However, bullet analyses had been conducted and it was determined that the bullet came from a special weapon. At this point, there was a detail that caught Naranjo's attention: the mark on the bullet core. This mark pointed to a very specific type of weapon. This technology wasn't common 20 years ago, but now it was more advanced. Maybe reanalysis could be done. Naranjo called ballistics expert Dr. Patricia Mendez. "Patricia, is it possible to reanalyze a bullet from 20 years ago?" he asked. Dr. Mendez said it was possible, but very sensitive equipment would be needed. In the afternoon, Naranjo and Dr. Mendez met in the laboratory. The bullet from the María Elena case had been carefully preserved. Dr. Mendez examined the microscopic traces on the bullet with modern equipment. "This is very interesting," said Dr. Mendez, looking through the microscope. This bullet came from a very special weapon. Only military personnel use these types of weapons. And more importantly, there's small damage on the weapon. This damage leaves a unique mark on the bullet. This information was very important for the case. The killer could be someone with a military background, or a civilian using a military weapon. In either case, the research area had narrowed. Naranjo immediately requested access to the personnel records of the Colombian Armed Forces. A list of military personnel who had served in the area where María Elena lived in 2004 was needed. When the list arrived, there were 47 names. Among them were security officers, police chiefs, and retired soldiers. Naranjo began examining each one by one. While checking the names, one caught his attention: Captain Luis Fernando Torres. This person had served as security chief in the area where María Elena lived in 2004. Even more interesting was that Torres had resigned suddenly in 2005. Naranjo began gathering more information about Torres. The man had worked in the private security sector after resigning. He was now retired and living outside Bogotá. At this point, Naranjo's instincts kicked in. Torres's resignation date was only 3 months after María Elena's murder. Could this be a coincidence? Naranjo checked Torres's address in 2004. Surprisingly, it was only 500 meters away from María Elena's house. He was almost a neighbor. That evening, Naranjo tried to put all the pieces together. Torres was María Elena's neighbor, had a military background, and had suddenly resigned shortly after the murder. However, the motive was still unclear. The next morning, Naranjo investigated Torres's background in more detail. The man had experienced some disciplinary problems in his military career. He had received. However, one file caught his attention: Torres versus Torres divorce case. María Elena was the lawyer for Luis Fernando Torres's wife. Here was the connection. Naranjo's heart raced. Torres's wife had hired María Elena as a lawyer for the divorce case. In this situation, María Elena had prepared documents about Torres's violence and presented them to court. When he examined the file in more detail, Naranjo discovered surprising information. María Elena had documented Torres's history of violence very well and presented a strong case in court. As a result, Torres's wife had both won the divorce and guaranteed her alimony rights. This situation had destroyed Torres both financially and socially. His military career was damaged, his prestige was shaken, and he fell into economic hardship. He might have seen María Elena as responsible for all this. Now the motive was also clear: revenge. Torres might have taken revenge on María Elena, thinking she was responsible for losing the divorce case. Naranjo thought it was time to test his hypothesis. He needed to find and talk to Torres. The man was still alive and residing outside Bogotá. That afternoon, Naranjo went to Torres's address. The house was in a small town, in a modest neighborhood. When Naranjo knocked on the door, an elderly man opened it. It was Luis Fernando Torres. "Can I help you?" said Torres with a suspicious expression. Naranjo introduced himself and said he wanted to talk about the María Elena Castillo case. Torres's face suddenly changed. "I haven't heard that name in a very long time," said Torres nervously. "Why do you want to talk to me?" Naranjo said there were just some routine questions, that they knew Torres had served in the neighborhood where she lived at that time. Torres agreed to talk but looked very uncomfortable. He was constantly rubbing his hands and giving furtive glances. These behaviors were important clues for Naranjo. "Did you know María Elena Castillo?" Naranjo asked. Torres hesitated for a moment. "I had heard the name, she lived in the neighborhood, but I didn't know her personally." This answer was half true. Torres knew her but wasn't saying why. "I know you were going through a divorce process in 2004, said Naranjo, carefully. Torres's face tensed even more. "Yes, it was a difficult period, but what does this have to do with María Elena?" "Your wife's lawyer was María Elena," said Naranjo, directly. Torres's reaction was immediate. His face went white. His hands started trembling. I didn't know who the lawyer was," he stammered. This reaction clearly showed that Torres was lying. Naranjo increased the pressure. "María Elena's signature is in the court records. She prepared your divorce case file." Torres was now in defense mode. "Okay, maybe she was the lawyer, but I never met her. The case was resolved between my wife and her lawyer. So what do you think about María Elena's murder?" Naranjo asked. Torres answered with a confused expression. "It was a very sad event. No one deserves such a thing." Naranjo was analyzing Torres's behavior. The man was clearly nervous and defensive. However, there was no concrete evidence yet. When the question "where were you that night" came, Torres panicked even more. "Which night?" he asked, trying to buy time. "The night María Elena was killed, November 12, 2004, said Naranjo. Torres thought for a long time. "How can I remember 20 years ago? I was probably at home sleeping." This answer was too general and unconvincing. Naranjo tried a different tactic. "Do you know how to use weapons?" Torres couldn't avoid this question due to his military background. "Of course I'm a soldier, but I haven't used weapons for years." "What weapon were you using in 2004? This question cornered Torres. "Standard pistol, official weapon." "Why are you asking?" Naranjo didn't mention the bullet analysis but watched Torres's reaction. The man was becoming increasingly nervous. After the conversation ended, Naranjo was convinced that Torres was guilty. However, there wasn't enough evidence for court yet. He needed to work more. That evening, Naranjo compiled all the information. Torres had motive, revenge, opportunity, being a neighbor, and weapon skills, military service. The only thing missing was concrete evidence. The next morning, Naranjo checked Torres's weapon records from 2004. The official weapon given to him as a captain had been returned in 2005. However, the records indicated that the weapon was damaged. This information was very important. The damaged weapon traces mentioned by Dr. Mendez matched Torres's weapon. Now the connection could be established. Naranjo immediately went to the police and presented his findings. Commissioner Rodriguez was astonished. How did you make this much progress in 3 days? Sometimes the simplest questions give the most complex answers, said Naranjo. Everyone thought the murder was a complex conspiracy, but it was a simple revenge murder. Police took Torres into custody. He continued to deny in the first interrogations, but as the evidence strengthened, his defense collapsed. Especially the weapon damage information cornered him. In the search of Torres's house, newspaper clippings about María Elena were found. He had kept them for 20 years. He also preserved the documents of the divorce case, apparently constantly planning revenge. Finally, Torres broke down and confessed. That woman ruined my life. She took my marriage, my career, everything from me. I couldn't stand it and went to her house one night. I just wanted to talk, but she didn't want to listen to me. An argument broke out and I couldn't control myself. This confession ended the 20-year mysterious case. María Elena Castillo's family had finally found justice. The secret of Naranjo's success was just one clue: the damage mark on the bullet. This technology wasn't developed enough 20 years ago, but modern analysis methods had revealed that small detail. Justice prevails, even if late, said Naranjo in his statement to journalists. Sometimes all we need is to ask the right question. María Elena's family expressed their gratitude to Naranjo. We waited 20 years and had lost hope. You gave us peace, said her father, in tears. This case went down in history as one of the most important achievements in Naranjo's career. 3 days, one clue, and tremendous analytical power had ended 20 years of injustice. After the case was closed, Naranjo returned to his quiet retirement life. However, this success had a very special meaning for him. He had proven that justice was always possible, that no case was truly unsolvable. Torres was sentenced to life imprisonment. Even after 20 years, justice had been served for María Elena Castillo. And this was the most beautiful proof of Óscar Naranjo's genius. After this case, the Colombian police changed their approach to cold cases. Naranjo's methods began to be taught as lessons at the police academy. This approach, called the Naranjo method, taught that simple questions could give big answers. The retired general received many offers after this success: consulting, teaching, book writing. However, he politely declined all of them. My job is done, he would say. The young people can take over now. However, the María Elena case was not Naranjo's last case. After this success, dozens of other unsolved cases knocked on his door. And in each one, he approached with the same meticulousness and genius. The next case was a 15-year missing person case. The one after that was a 25-year fraud case. Naranjo seemed to have become an expert in unsolvable cases. Each was a new example of his analytical intelligence. Following this success, similar requests began to come from various cities in Colombia. A 15-year missing person case from Medellín, a 12-year murder case from Cali, an 8-year fraud case from Cartagena. Each was a cold case that local police couldn't solve. Naranjo accepted these cases too. In the Carlos Ruiz case from Medellín, Naranjo used the same systematic approach again. The last days before his disappearance, his work life, social circle, he examined every detail one by one. And 5 days later, he discovered that Carlos had been killed as a result of a work dispute and his body had been hidden. This second success further increased Naranjo's fame. However, he avoided exaggerated praise. It's just the result of patient work, he would say modestly. His third case was a femicide from Cali. The killer. These principles began to be taught as lessons at the Colombian Police Academy, and hundreds of young detectives were trained. The last case he solved was an 18-year fraud case. The person responsible for a Ponzi scheme that victimized thousands of people was caught thanks to Naranjo's analysis. The man was living a secret life abroad. After these successes, Naranjo made a real retirement decision. 8 cases are enough, he said to his wife Maria with a smile. It's really time to rest now. However, his legacy continued. The young detectives he trained continued to fight cold cases throughout Colombia using his methods. This group, known as Naranjo students, solved dozens of cases every year and provided justice. Óscar Naranjo had become not just a retired general but a symbol of the fight against injustice. He went down in history as the man who solved 20-year cold cases in 3 days. And most importantly, he taught that no one should give up. Justice is always possible, you just need to find the right clue. In the months following the resolution of the María Elena Castillo case, Naranjo's phone rang constantly. From local media to national news channels, everyone wanted to learn the story of this extraordinary success. The question, how was a case unsolved for 20 years solved in 3 days, occupied all of Colombia. Although Naranjo tried to avoid media attention, he understood the importance of this success and found it worth sharing. Following this success, Naranjo established the Naranjo Institute, which began training cold case specialists throughout Colombia. The institute's curriculum was based on the methodology Naranjo had developed over the years. Systematic approach, detail-focused analysis, modern technology use, and understanding of human psychology. This four-pillar program began attracting students from across Latin America. 2 years after solving the María Elena Castillo case, Naranjo's story was made into a documentary film, titled 72 Hours: The Return of Justice. The film was shown at international film festivals and received great acclaim. The film emphasized not only Naranjo's success but also the importance of the justice system, and that no case is unsolvable. The Colombian Attorney General's office officially recognized Naranjo's contributions by awarding him the Justice Honor Award. During the ceremony, Attorney General María Fernanda Cabal said, "Óscar Naranjo is a name that will be written in golden letters in the history of justice in our country. Every case he solved has rebuilt trust in our justice system." In this award ceremony, Naranjo's speech clearly outlined his philosophy. "I am just an ordinary person who uses his experiences. The real heroes are the families who waited for justice for years. All I did was ask the right questions and patiently search for answers." 3 years later, published statistics were striking. The detectives trained by Naranjo had solved a total of 150 cold cases. This figure was an unprecedented success in regional history. Every solved case meant a family finding peace and increased trust in the justice system. Today, 72-year-old Óscar Naranjo lives a quiet retirement life in Bogotá. He spends time in his garden, reads books, and occasionally meets with old colleagues. However, his real legacy lives on in the young detectives working throughout Colombia. Known as the Naranjo generation, these detectives continue to work according to the principles their master taught them. They solve new cases every day, new families find justice, and in every success, Óscar Naranjo's words, "No case is unsolvable," echo. The María Elena Castillo case was not just the solution to a murder, but also the beginning of a transformation. Thanks to this case, Colombia's justice system was reshaped, the approach to cold cases changed, and thousands of families regained their hope. Naranjo's story shows that age is just a number, that real success comes with experience and determination. A phone call he received at age 70 initiated the most productive period of his life and left indelible marks on Colombian history. Today, María Elena's grave is visited by hundreds of people every year. The words "Justice finally prevailed" written on the tombstone stand as living proof of Óscar Naranjo's legacy, and every visitor leaves remembering that no case is truly unsolvable.